The notorious U.S. military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where hundreds of men were detained by America for years without charge or trial. What does it say about the U.S. judicial system, and why is Guantanamo still open after almost 20 years? Hello, I'm Anand Naidoo, and this is The Heat. In the weeks and months following the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States in 2001, the U.S. struck back. It rounded up hundreds of men suspected of terrorism in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and several other countries. They were sent to a remote U.S. military facility in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to be held and interrogated. Many have alleged they were tortured, and almost all were never charged or ever faced trial. Most have since been released. But over the years, the prison became a stain on both the U.S., both at home and abroad. And despite repeated calls for its closure, it is still in operation today. Later in the show, we will hear from two people who have very strong feelings on all of this. But I want to begin by bringing you an exclusive interview with a former Guantanamo prisoner. Mansoor Adayfi was just a Yemeni teenager when he was captured by the Americans. After 14 years in Guantanamo without ever being charged or facing trial, he was finally released and is now living in Serbia. He is the co-author of the book, Don't Forget Us Here, Lost and Found at Guantanamo. Mansoor Adayfi talked with me recently about his grueling experience. Mansoor Adayfi, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
When the 9/11 attacks took place, you were an 18-year-old. You were from Yemen. You were living in Afghanistan at the time. Tell us what happened. How did you end up in custody?
At that age, at that time, at that place, we didn't pay much attention to it. But later on, I was ambushed and kidnapped by the warlord and sold to the Americans who came to Afghanistan.
So when you say you were kidnapped, did they receive a bounty for you?
Yes, of course, because at that time, especially the CIA, American were offering large bounty for anyone who, especially Arabs or foreigners. And we were sold to the CIA as the more the high rank, the more the people get the high rank, the more the money the people got.
And these bounties?
I found people. Yeah, yes, for bounties.
Yeah, so these bounty hunters, they didn't have to show any kind of proof that you were involved in anything illegal or anything like that?
No, they just have to say something and they go for it.
Okay, you were then moved to Kandahar in Afghanistan, and you were subsequently moved to the United States prison at Guantanamo Bay. But tell us about your experience in Kandahar. What happened there?
I moved to one of the black sites, actually, before to Kandahar, which, it was one of the worst experience in my life. Then I moved to, after around 2 months and a half, when they found I'm not the person we're looking for, I moved to Kandahar. From Kandahar I was shipped to Guantanamo. Oh, I wish it was that easy.
So you say you were at one of the black sites in Kandahar. That's, of course, the torture chambers that were used there. So were you tortured there?
Yes, of course. Anyone who ended up at the black site, they would torture in the worst way. I mean, there were no limitations, and mostly they used also Afghanis who so cruel and torturing people.
What happened to you?
Beating, hanging, no food, beating. It's a lot. I mean.
And this torture was carried out by Afghans. Were there any others involved in this?
Yes, Americans and Afghans at the same time. Afghan interrogators and Afghanis soldiers. Around 24 hours without stopping.
You would then move to Guantanamo Bay. What were the first days, the first weeks like over there? How were you treated?
We spent around 25 days in Kandahar detention and moved there to Guantanamo. We had no idea where we were until when or what's going to happen to us at that place at that time. So we were afraid. We were told we're going to be killed. We didn't know where we were. I mean, we expected anything to happen to us because we just became numbers and figures in orange jumpsuit, and guards and campus staff at that time, they don't have any kind of defined rules how to treat us. We couldn't talk, stand, or pray, or do anything.
You know, you say you were put in orange jumpsuits when you were in Guantanamo Bay. I noticed that you're wearing an orange scarf right now. Is there a relationship with what you experienced there?
Yeah, this is part of me now, like my hand, my ear, my nose, my whatever. But also it's to show solidarity with the innocent men who are still at that place. Also, to solidarity with the people who wrongly detained or imprisoned, or those who their freedom stripped away from them without any kind of legal representation or any rights. And as you know, now Guantanamo is a symbol of oppression, injustice, torture, lawlessness, abuse of power, indefinite detention. Also, it's kind of one of the major human rights violations in the 21st century. Just let me give you a little background about Guantanamo. Might the dear viewer want to hear about it? You know, Guantanamo was established, as you know, in 2002. Around 779 men arrived there at age only the youngest detainee, and I repeat that the youngest detainee was only a few months old. The oldest was 105 years old. All kind of men, teachers, doctors, scholars, journalists, mafias, drug dealers. There were also some people from Taliban fighters or from Al-Qaeda, but really small percentage. According to the ACLU, only 8% were from Al-Qaeda or Taliban. So most of the people who ended up there, they were sold for bounty money. And I would say, you know, like not just as detainees, we were victims of Guantanamo. There were also guards and campus staff, they were also victims of the machinery of Guantanamo, because those humans, they were forced to mistreat people and torture people at that place.
So you were there for 14 years. What was life like during those 14 years for you and the other prisoners as well?
Oh, you know, someone asked me, how you spent your 20s? I said, what? What 20s? I didn't know what 20s means, honestly. You know, because when you end up at that place, we were totally disconnected from the world, isolated, and we were between life and death. We weren't real life or dead. Everything froze for us. Now, I can tell you, physically, I'm maybe, you know, how old I am? 24, because I didn't count Guantanamo. But physically, we grew up, we grew old. But mentally and psychologically, no. We actually deteriorated back. Time passed. And when we spend that time, everything the same, every routine the same day. We have only to fight everything for the basic of rights, for our religious to be respected, to be treated. We wanted to know what's going to happen to us. What have we done? I mean, this is the main questions. Also, at the same time, at that place, we spend a long time on hunger strike that also devastated our health. Imagine American kids being kidnapped and imprisoned for 10, 5, 15 years without any kind of charge or trial, without any rights, being punished for practicing the religion or experimented on. And I mean, and they have realized this is Guantanamo. That's Guantanamo still until that day. People indefinite detention at that place for the last 20 years. There are people who have been cleared in 2009, and they're still at Guantanamo.
No, you were there, as I said, for 14 years in the prison. You were not charged. There was no trial. Was there any kind of legal process whatsoever?
No illegal basis to Guantanamo. You know, everything can change at any time. We were allowed to have lawyers in 2004. I got a lawyer in 2009. But again, there is no legal basis for the place, for the charge, for the accusation, for the process. It's baseless. It's like the place outside of the law. So they can do whatever they want in a way they want, simply.
Now, you say you got an attorney in 2009. What did he do?
You know, anything, he cannot tell me anything. Everything is classified, confidential. And then he told me, Mansur, they have nothing. They have nothing, basically. You know, all my behavior in the camp, that was classified as one of the worst because my behavior in the detention was I was react to whatever they threw at me. I was a kid, a tribal from mountain of Yemen. Of course, if you mistreat me, if you treat me abnormal, I will behave abnormal. This is normal. But that wasn't accepted by the US government, unfortunately.
And then you finally ended up being released. What were the circumstances of that release?
I was released the same way I was shipped to Guantanamo. I was forced to leave Guantanamo because when they found out it was a mistaken identity, then I was forced to leave to Serbia. Again, I was shackled, handcuffed, hooded, gagged, everything, and shipped from Guantanamo. It's like that. It's just Guantanamo is really... I have written the book, Don't Forget Us Here. I think I try to take the reader inside Guantanamo. They might understand Guantanamo.
So you were kept in prison for 14 years, no charges, no trial. When you were released, did the United States offer any amends, make any amends, even an apology?
No, nothing, nothing. They said they will never apologize. And as detainees, we are not allowed to sue any U.S. government official who involved in our torture or kidnapping or whatever. We're not allowed to sue anyone. We are not allowed to sue. We are not allowed to sue the U.S. government or any official who involved in those issues.
You know, the United States calls itself a leader of the free world, a champion of human rights, a country where the rule of law is paramount, where everybody has protections under the law. But when you look at your experience, what do you make of that?
You know, at Guantanamo, at the beginning, we looked at America and American through Guantanamo school. Then when we come know more about America and Americans and so on, that changed, alhamdulillah, because we met really nice people. I call Guantanamo lawyers are the real heroes because they are the one who try to protect Americans from the system itself that try to dehumanize Americans. I believe America have great values, but there is some people who try to, you know, misuse power to serve their own interest. This is my belief.
You are now in Serbia. Why Serbia?
Oh, you can ask the CIA, the FBI, NSA, George W. Bush, Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, whoever. I have no idea why Serbia. I told them I didn't want to come here. They told me you have no choice.
What about your home in Yemen and your family there? Have you been able to visit them? Have you been able to go back to Yemen?
Oh man, in Yemen it's another story. It's a disaster. You know, civil war for the last 7 years. And famine, starvation, several people die every day. And no, I couldn't visit my family. They cannot to come to visit me here. Last year, the Houthis attacked my family, arrested my father, destroyed our home, shot my sisters, and threatened to rape my family. Simply, I mean, it's like my heart bleeds every single day when I saw my country, my people suffer that way.
What is life like for you right now? I mean, the imprisonment at Guantanamo, does it still impact your life now?
Yes, of course. I mean, not just me, everyone. We live in the stigma. We call it Guantanamo 2.0. We live in many challenges, difficulties. We cannot, I mean, imagine you are being sent to a country where you have no family, no community, and you are being accused of being a terrorist, a bad guy, or live in the stigma of Guantanamo, where if you try to make friends or meet people, they were arrested or interrogated or harassed. And I have been working on my thesis about rehabilitation and reintegration of former Guantanamo detainees, where there is no any such thing called reintegration or rehabilitation. And you know, some people who are lucky end up in countries where they manage to fit in the society and become productive citizens. Yeah, they move on their life, but us, we still struggle.
You are now an author. You showed us your book there a moment ago. What are your plans for the rest of your life?
Yeah, this is the book, Don't Forget Us. Originally, the book was written at Guantanamo, Moments from Guantanamo. I thought if I was able to capture those moments of joy and beauty, survival and struggle, I might change how people thought about Guantanamo. Alhamdulillah, we managed to publish the book. The second project will be another book, Life After Guantanamo. Then, I'm looking for a wife, man. I'm trying to get married and have 2 lovely girls. For now, this is my dream.
Okay, Mansoor, good luck with that. Mansoor Adayfi, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much.
Mansoor Adayfi's account is, of course, just one of hundreds that can be told by prisoners who were also locked up in Guantanamo. Joining me now here in Washington, D.C. is Brian Becker. He is the National Director for the Act Now to Stop War and End Racism group. And also with us is Joseph Williams. He is a senior news editor, U.S. News and World Report. Welcome to both of you. Brian, great to have you with us. And let's start with you. And I should add, Brian, that your group, the Answer Coalition, actually started 20 years ago, didn't it?
It did. It started December 14th, 2001, 3 days after September 11th. I lived in Lower Manhattan. We had friends who were in the World Trade Center. We experienced the bedlam and chaos and understood the grief and rage that New Yorkers and other Americans had, but we started an anti-war movement then because we felt that the Bush administration would cynically manipulate those emotions to take the country to a larger war in the Middle East. And in fact, sadly, that's what happened.
Okay, Brian, let's start with how men like Mansoor Adayfi ended up in Guantanamo. As we heard, he was sold by warlords in Afghanistan for a bounty. I did a recent interview with the journalist and author Chris Hedges, very well known in the United States. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on global terrorism. That was while he was working for the New York Times. He's also weighed in on the situation in Guantanamo. This is what he told us. Let's listen.
Once you have to torture people in order to get information, then your intelligence system is already at a point where it doesn't work. Remember how most of those people ended up in Guantanamo. The U.S. was saturating Afghanistan with leaflets promising bounties for people who turned in supposed members of Al-Qaeda. Well, of course, you went and grabbed the guy who had the shop across the street and was your competition and hauled him off. These people were sold by warlords. Very, very few of them had anything to do with the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, almost none. So the whole thing became farcical. And the famous case of Colin Powell going before the UN and making a claim that Saddam Hussein had ties with Al-Qaeda was based on a supposed confession by a guy named Abu Zubaydah, who was tortured. And years later, they asked why he said this. He said, because I wanted the torture to stop. I wanted to give the Americans what they wanted.
Brian, the majority of the prisoners in Guantanamo were never charged with anything, and many were captured for bounties, as we have just heard. There was no link. They didn't have any links to Al-Qaeda, yet President Bush at the time called them the worst of the worst. One question is, why were they taken to Guantanamo and not brought to the United States, where they could be charged in a federal court here?
Right. I mean, that's the most important question. Of the 790 plus men at Guantanamo, there ended up with 8 verdicts, and 3 of them were overturned completely. Several others were partially overturned. This process of torture and internment and kidnapping, or what was called rendering, to Guantanamo or to Bagram or to the other CIA black sites, it had its own life. And actually, once you are torturing people, their testimony is actually tainted, and so you can't bring them to trial. And so the whole process of torture, again, I asked some of the people who were in the CIA at the time, including the people who helped capture Abu Zubaydah, who was cooperating, by the way, with the FBI for 8 months before the CIA started the enhanced interrogation techniques, the torture program. And then they waterboarded him 83 times. And I asked them, why did you torture? He was already talking. And they said, we tortured for torture's sake. In other words, the system was set up, and then it had its own life. And again, it wasn't about bringing people to justice. It wasn't about criminal prosecutions.
Joseph Williams, good to have you with us. In the months after 9/11, of course, the United States wanted payback for what happened during those attacks. And payback, even if it meant they could round up anybody and put them on Guantanamo Bay. Could you give us a sense of what the mood was like in the country in 2001 and in early 2002? That set the sort of Guantanamo Bay prison in motion.
The mood of the country, and I recall it was a metropolitan editor in Boston where 2 of the planes had originated. So the mood in the country was very much on edge. People were very concerned about terrorism. People were very agitated and looking, as you said, for payback, not from person to person, but certainly if it occurred and the president said it was okay, then certainly people were more willing to believe him and give him the benefit of the doubt. That, of course, led to him having virtually carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to with whomever they rounded up on the battlefield. It led him, to have endless bombing campaigns in Afghanistan, the bounties that you had mentioned, and Guantanamo was seen as an alternative to bringing people on American soil who they believed were very, very dangerous, and that they didn't want to risk the chance of having a conviction or somebody being acquitted and being released on the streets of say, New York or Washington. So they very much saw Guantanamo Bay as an out. They saw it as a way to distance themselves from the nasty business of terror and torture and keep people away from the machinations of the American judicial system, which, for all of its benefits, has a few slights, and that is that innocent people are set free, or at least in theory anyway. So they didn't want to risk that happening because Guantanamo was a way to keep that system rigged, was a way to keep people away from having to see the nasty business that was done overseas in the name of keeping them safe.
And the Bush administration at the time, Joseph, they didn't tolerate any kind of opposition to what they were doing. Remember the manipulation on the part of George Bush himself when he said that if you're not with us, then you're with them, you're with the terrorists.
Absolutely, and that was the same era that gave us the axis of evil speech, which was kind of the predecessor of the invasion of Iraq. So there very much was a situation where people felt like if you weren't with the president, you were against him. He very much set that dynamic into play and used it to great advantage and to great harm, as we've heard.
Brian, you were telling us a moment ago about you were asking questions, questioning the CIA about the torture they carried out at Guantanamo Bay and at these black sites in other parts of the world. What did the men in Guantanamo Bay endure?
Well, when you look at, I encourage people to go online, use the search term enhanced interrogation techniques. You'll see it all there. There was sexual humiliation, extreme heat, extreme cold, hanging people from their wrists from the ceiling, walling, beatings, extreme loudness, sleep deprivation to the point of hallucinations, putting people in small boxes like that you'd put into the cemetery. You're putting them in along with insects and snakes if they had a certain phobia. I mean, the level of sadism and sadistic behavior, and the U.S. government, the Bush administration had lawyers saying, no, this is legal, and they had psychologists saying, this will work, this will really work. I mean, you had this level of illegality, and by the way, the American people were kept in the dark about it, and then finally when it came out, the people who brought it out were sent to prison themselves, not the people who tortured, but who revealed the torture. That was heroic CIA whistleblowers. And then the CIA, when they knew the Senate was issuing a 6,700-page report about the torture program, the CIA hacked the Senate oversight committees. So this level of lawlessness is so sort of emblematic of the period after September 11th. And sadly, when President Obama came in, he said, we tortured some folks, but it's time to move forward. Well, you can't move forward when you kill people, when you torture people. These are illegal acts, and if the country does pretend to be run by the rule of law, you have to hold people to account for illegal criminal conduct.
Right, I want to get to President Obama's role in a moment, but Brian, just one other thing. Some of the torture that was carried out on these prisoners was videotaped. There were tapes of the torture. And when the Oversight Committee started its hearings, these tapes were destroyed by someone at the CIA. This was evidence that was destroyed. Nothing ever happened to that person. That's right.
The CIA, in complete defiance of the Senate Oversight Committee, the Senate has a committee that is over the CIA. They said, do not destroy those tapes, and the CIA destroyed the tapes anyway. Yep. We've heard lots of talk about the deep state and that sort of expression. Well, the fact of the matter is, if the CIA is burying tapes, destroying tapes about its criminal conduct, Even now, they should be brought to court.
Right.
This is criminal activity.
Okay, Joseph Williams, I want to get to President Obama's role, to the politics of this. He promised to close the prison during the campaign before he became president. Here he is in 2013 making the case against Guantanamo. Let's listen.
The original premise for opening Gitmo, that detainees would not be able to challenge their detention, was found unconstitutional 5 years ago. In the meantime, Gitmo has become a symbol around the world for an America that flouts the rule of law.
So, Joseph, now we have President Biden, who's under pressure to close the prison, but close it, and then the right wing will say that you're weak on terrorism. Can it be closed?
It's a conundrum. In the literal sense, yes, it absolutely can. A president can do this with a stroke of a pen. He can do this with executive orders. He can command the Pentagon to shut it down. He is the commander-in-chief, after all. Politically, it's next to impossible, and that is because of the dynamic you just alluded to, is the fact that the Republicans would scream bloody murder. They would hold up the blood-soaked shirt of 9/11. They would try to claim and insist, and even some Democrats, I might add, would claim and insist that to bring the terrorist masterminds of the 9/11 attacks to U.S. shores and to try them in U.S. courts run the risk of them being acquitted. And as we've heard earlier, because they were tortured, that risk increases because you can't use information obtained through torture in a U.S. courtroom. It will be tossed out by any judge worth his or her salt. And so politically, it is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Biden has not taken very assertive steps towards closing the prison. He probably cannot. He probably will not in his time, like Obama promised.
Yeah.
He saw the political reality and was not able to get anything done with it.
Brian, I've only got a minute left, but if we look at what happened at Guantanamo Bay, there are those in the United States who will say, look, no matter what happened, no matter what the mistakes that were made there, Guantanamo Bay does serve the purpose of stopping terrorism. What would you say to them?
Absolutely false. Most of these men had nothing to do with September 11th. We have clear documentary evidence that they have been sold by warlords, that they've been picked up by people who had no evidence. This did not keep America safe. That did not keep America safe. And September 11th didn't start the cycle of violence. The United States needs to re-examine completely its entire aggressive foreign policy in the Middle East. If you drone people constantly, if you occupy their countries, if you impose sanctions on them, if you use proxy regimes to carry out wars like the war in Yemen, it creates an ocean of hatred. It contributes to the cycle of violence. It doesn't stop the violence.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Brian Becker, Joseph Williams, thanks to both of you for joining us. Thanks for joining us on The Heat. I'm Anand Naidoo in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.